Hey, welcome back. This is lesson number 6. In the previous lesson, we covered authority and governance, and I hope you are up to date with your homework so far. In this lesson, we'll look at resources and compensation. So how do we invest our time and money, the allocation of capital, effort, and other assets, and how do we pay, compensate, and reward people for contributing to the DAO? Some really juicy topics, so let's jump in. So what exactly are resources? If we think of DAOs as complex living systems, then resources are like the air they breathe. Every organization, no matter what it stands for, needs to figure out how to use what it's got to achieve its goals. Every dollar you have is an opportunity to put something into action. Whether it's running the day-to-day, paying people for their work, starting something new, making outside investments, or even giving to charity or funding public goods. Resources mean possibilities. Every hour that someone puts in is a chance to pump some life into existing roles and projects, take something on that's fresh and new, build relationships, learn something new, or just take a break and recharge. So to say it again, resources are the oxygen of a DAO, and every choice we make either feeds or starves this web of possibilities. That's why figuring out how to distribute resources is really important for keeping your DAO healthy and going strong in the long run. As we often do, let's take a look at how old school organizations operate. Many, if not most, still rely on annual budgets decided by CFOs and top-level executives who aren't really involved in the teams they are setting the budget for. This system, to put it bluntly, is broken. In a world that's getting more and more complex and changing faster all the time, these budgets are just too inflexible. Situations can change in a heartbeat, but traditional budgets, not so much. For example, what happens when the market takes a nosedive? Or if our users change their habits? Or if a new rival comes along and shakes up how we do business? Yearly budgets are often based on old news, like how well we did last year, and assumptions about things that might happen in a year's time or more into the future. So basically, corporate budgets are outdated the moment they are finalized. However, many organizations continue to stick to the budget as their management tool, no matter the circumstances. I really like this quote from Aaron Dignan from his book, Brave New Work. He says, revenue targets can act as a ceiling since there is no incentive to exceed them, whereas budgets become a floor as there is no motivation to spend less. It really highlights the paradox around budgets where those at the bottom of the corporate ladder have no input or influence over the budgets themselves. Legacy budgeting is broken. So, what's the alternative? How can DAOs think about budgeting? Vitalik Buterin wrote an insightful blog post in 2020 titled, DAOs are not corporations. There's a link to this essay below this video. In this post, he argues the following. 2 things that can help ensure that an organization will actually turn out to be meaningfully decentralized include 1. A truly high level of autonomy for pods, where the pods accept resources from the core and are occasionally checked for alignment and competence if they want to keep getting those resources, but otherwise act entirely on their own and don't take any orders from the core. And number 2, highly decentralized and diverse core governance. This does not require a governance token, but it does require broader and more diverse participation in the core. So he argues that what's needed is diverse governance at the core level, and the DAO then receives funds or generates revenue at core level, which is then distributed to the individual pods or guilds or working groups upon request. These pods then accept the resources from the core and are checked for alignment and competence if they want to keep getting those resources, but otherwise they act entirely on their own and they don't take any orders from the core itself. But today, few organizations find the courage to relinquish central control over resources, especially over funds. But by being dynamic and tapping into collective intelligence, you'll find that resource allocation is drastically improved. By experimenting with dynamic collaborative budgeting, DAOs are much better able to allocate resources in a rapid changing environment. But what exactly needs to be in place for this to work? What are the guiding principles? Well, number one, allow your teams with knowledge and expertise to control their own budget. Number two, give teams the authority to make their own decisions within the team. Number three, provide those teams with the tools to give feedback to the core and check alignment and competence. And number four, provide open and transparent channels of communication for teams to learn from other teams. Teams must be able to react quickly based on new information from other teams in the DAO. When teams have the right and the inclination to experiment with their own rules and their own norms, they can find ways to collaboratively leverage and preserve resources. By really making the DAO's capital everyone's capital, it will be much better deployed in service of the collective purpose. So what does this look like in practice? Well, the most common way of allocating resources in most DAOs today requires a guild or a working group to submit a proposal to the core DAO requesting funding, typically for a set duration of time or to fund a specific project. An example here is the Public Goods Working Group of ENS DAO submitting a funding request proposal for Q1 and Q2. In such a proposal, the working group is expected to clearly communicate the amount requested, provide a detailed breakdown of how the funding will be used, and the expected impact or outcomes of the funding. In this case, the working group requested 250,000 USDC and 50 ETH for 6 months, and the proposal passed following an on-chain token-weighted vote. At Colony, we use the advice process and the consent process to fund teams and projects. For example, in order to launch a new initiative within DAO Club, I put a proposal forward to the Meta Colony requesting 18,000 XDAI for a 6-month period. DAO members first had the opportunity to ask questions during the understand phase, and then during the improve phase, all members had a chance to make suggestions, and I implemented several changes to make it safe to try. The final version of the proposal received consent from everyone, and I was able to transfer the funds out of the Meta Colony treasury. For DAO builders, the consent process might be a good way to seek participation in and contribution to big important financial decisions. Or if you have a governance token, you'll probably include your token holders in the decision-making process via a token vote. Either way, when DAO members have the opportunity to provide input and really have their feedback considered and implemented, it creates a very strong sense of ownership. Okay, so now we've covered resources. Next, let's look at compensation. Work is how we get the essentials: food, water, and a roof over our heads. But the way we think about getting paid has changed a lot over time. It's not just about money anymore. Now, we've got all sorts of financial and non-financial perks to draw us in, keep us in, and even inspire a super diverse group of workers. Yet, despite lots of evidence saying otherwise, companies still think that pay is the main thing that gets people excited to work. When people can't find purpose or meaning in what they do, they often see their jobs as nothing more than stepping stones leading to better titles and bigger paychecks. But this mad rush by companies and workers show a real misunderstanding about how pay is connected to things like satisfaction, happiness, and loyalty. Lots of research has tried to find the link between better pay, bonus pay, company profits, and other performance markers. What they've discovered is that there is no or even a slightly negative correlation between how much you pay and the results you get. It turns out what makes us happy and what ticks us off at work are actually two different things. Things that get us pumped up about our jobs include feeling recognized for our hard work, having interesting tasks, being part of important decisions, and opportunities to grow and get better. Improving these aspects boosts satisfaction by making the work itself more rewarding. On the flip side, factors like company policies, job security, how our bosses act, and pay and benefits can lead to dissatisfaction. But improving these factors can make the work environment better and lessen the dissatisfaction. This should make us think twice as leaders in DAOs. You can't buy your way to performance and contributor happiness. It's not the same as a higher purpose. To attract and retain good people, DAOs must focus on what actually motivates people. Being recognized for their work, doing meaningful and interesting tasks, getting a say in decisions, and having chances to advance and grow. So we've determined that pay and benefits are hygiene factors, but they are still important. We all have bills to pay and want to live a comfortable life, right? Here we're talking about salaries for full-time or part-time contributors, not one-off payments for specific tasks or bounties. Now, you might only just be getting started and not at the point where you're paying your contributors' salaries yet, but it's still worth thinking about early on. So, how can we handle pay in DAOs? One way to tackle favoritism and unfairness is through something called formulaic pay. This is something companies like Buffer use. You can go to their website, pop in a few details like the job that you're interested in, how experienced you are, and where you live, and it will tell you what you'd earn if you worked there. This is a take it or leave it deal. Once you've made it through their hiring process and your details are locked in, there's no wiggle room for negotiation. Market pay is another way to handle salaries. This method leans into the idea of self-adjusting systems, where many organizations set their pay rates based on what's typical in the market. How they go about this can vary, but basically they use the industry's average salary for a certain job as a starting point for deciding how much to pay. This is a more personalized approach, sometimes called paying the person. It uses 3 questions to figure out the market value for a new team member. Number 1, what could they earn if they worked somewhere else? Number 2, what would we pay to replace them? And number 3, how much would we pay to keep them if they got a better offer from another place? The aim here is to make sure that each employee is always paid a certain percentage of what they're worth within the market. But there's a catch. This approach still depends on someone else's personal judgment of another person's value, and that can let unconscious bias and favoritism sneak in. A third, and to some perhaps controversial option, is self-set pay. What if formulaic pay feels too simplified and market pay seems too biased? Well, you let your contributors decide their own salaries. This process involves using both internal and external pay data, looking at the DAO's financial situation, and understanding the mix of roles. Contributors then suggest what they think their salary should be for the upcoming year. At Colony, we used the consent process to switch over to this self-set pay system. Before deciding our own salaries, we have to consider the following factors. How much do I need to earn to live well and be satisfied with my pay? How do the next 12 months look for me in terms of workload and responsibility? How much can Colony afford to pay considering our runway and increased expenses? How much do my fellow contributors earn in similar roles? And how much do people with my skills, experience, and responsibilities earn elsewhere? Next, an elected compensation committee made up of our own fellow contributors review these proposals and provide feedback in the form of advice. The transparency around compensation is sufficient for most people to make sound decisions that can withstand the scrutiny of their peers. Beyond that, the benefits in financial acumen stewardship, and collective responsibility that this approach produces are unparalleled. Compensation is something we give a lot of importance to, yet it's almost funny that we hardly ever talk about it. In the Western world especially, talking about your salary is often seen as tasteless. But here's a simple fix. Get rid of the awkwardness around salaries and make them transparent within the organization and even to the public. Buffer, for instance, along with sharing its salary formula, also shares everyone's salaries and equity openly on its website. Research on organizations that have open salaries reported more job applications, lesser biases, and increased trust and productivity. So it's definitely something worth considering. Along with self-set pay, at Colony, we've also moved to open salaries. All contributor salaries are open and visible to everyone else in the DAO. Due to the transparent nature of DAOs, keeping salaries private will become increasingly more difficult, so an open salary policy will most likely be adapted by most DAOs in the future. DAOs are meant to be on-chain, so paying contributors directly from the treasury should be standard practice anyway, right? To wrap up compensation, it's worth noting the following. No set formula, level system, skills matrix, or job titles can fully embrace the complexity of an actual team of contributors. Transparency, open discussions, and sound judgment are the only things that can truly help us navigate what's fair. And even then, we'll still be wrestling with unavoidable issues of bias and privilege, which won't go away easily. Just keep in mind, we are all human, and this is where your emotional intelligence as a DAO builder will really come into play. Okay, that's all the content for lesson number 6. Here's what you need to do next. In your homework document, I'd like you to tell us how your DAO compensates its contributors. If your DAO is already open for contributors to join either part-time or full-time, how will they be compensated? When you're answering these questions, think about the following. Are they receiving native tokens or stablecoins? If not, what intrinsic motivation drives your contributors? How is compensation determined and agreed upon? Please complete these questions in your homework document, ready for submission at the end of this course. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next lesson. Good luck.